Things are not normal. By that, I mean if you go out in the world and start measuring things like human height, IQ, or the size of apples on a tree, you will find that for each of these things, most of the data clusters around some average value. This is so common that we call it the normal distribution. But some things in life are not like this.
Nature shows power laws all over the place. That seems weird. Like, is nature tuning itself to criticality?
If you make a crude measure of how big is a world war by how many people it kills, you find that it follows a power law. The outcome will vary in size over 10 million, 100 million.
It's much more likelihood of really big events than you would expect from a normal distribution. And they will totally skew the average.
The system you're looking at doesn't have any inherent physical scale. It's really hard to know what's going to happen next.
The more you measure, the bigger the average is, which is really weird. It sounds impossible.
It's very important to try to understand, which game you're playing and what are the payoffs going to be in the long run.
In the late 1800s, Italian engineer Vilfredo Pareto stumbled upon something no one had seen before. See, he suspected there might be a hidden pattern in how much money people make. So he gathered income tax records from Italy, England, France, and other European countries, and for each country, he plotted the distribution of income. Each country he looked at, he saw the same pattern, a pattern which still holds in most countries to this day. And it's not a normal distribution. If you think about a normal distribution like height, there's a clearly defined average, and extreme outliers basically never happen. I mean, you're never going to find someone who is, say, 5 times the average height. That would be physically impossible. But Pareto's income distributions were different. Take this curve for England. It shows the number of people who earn more than a certain income. The curve starts off declining steeply, most people earn relatively little, but then it falls away gradually, much more slowly than a normal distribution would, and it spans several orders of magnitude. There were people who earned 5 times, 10 times, even 100 times more than others. That kind of spread just wouldn't happen if income were normally distributed. Now, to shrink this huge spread of data, Pareto calculated the logarithms of all the values and plotted those instead. In other words, he used a log-log plot. And when he did that, the broad curve transformed into a straight line. The gradient was around negative 1.5. That means each time you double the income, say from 200 pounds to 400 pounds, the number of people earning at least that amount drops off by a factor of 2 to the power of 1.5, which is around 2.8. And this pattern holds for every doubling of income. So Pareto could describe the distribution of incomes with one simple equation. The number of people who earn an income greater than or equal to X is proportional to 1 over X to the power of 1.5. Now, that's what Pareto saw for England, but he performed the same analysis on data from Italy, France, Prussia, and a bunch of other countries. And he saw the same thing, again and again. Each time, the data transformed into a straight line, and the gradients were remarkably similar. That meant Pareto could describe the income distribution in each country with the same equation, 1 over the income to some power, where that power is just the absolute gradient of the logarithmic graph. This type of relationship is called a power law. When you move from the world of normal distributions to the world of power laws, things change dramatically. So to illustrate this, let's take a trip to the casino to play 3 different games. At table number 1, you get 100 tosses of a coin. Each time you flip and it lands on heads, you win $1. So the question is, how much would you be prepared to pay to play this game? Well, we need to work out how much you'd expect to win in this game and then pay less than that expected value. So the probability of throwing a head is 1/2. Multiply that by $1 and multiply that by 100 tosses. That gives you an expected payout of $50. so you should be willing to pay anything less than $50 to play this game. Sure, you might not win every time, but if you play the game hundreds of times, the small variations either side of the average will cancel out, and you can expect to turn a profit. One of the first people to study this kind of problem was Abraham de Moivre in the early 1700s. He showed that if you plot the probability of each outcome, you get a bell-shaped curve, which was later coined the normal distribution.
Normal distributions, the traditional explanation, is that when there are a lot of effects that are random, that are adding up, that's when you expect normals. So like how tall I am depends on a lot of random things about my nutrition, about my parents' genetics, all kinds of things. But if these random effects are additive, that is what tends to lead to normals.
At table number 2, there's a slightly different game. You still get 100 tosses of the coin, but this time, instead of potentially winning $1 on each flip, your winnings are multiplied by some factor. So you start out with $1, and then every time you toss a head, you multiply your winnings by 1.1. If instead the coin lands on tails, you multiply your winnings by 0.9. And after 100 tosses, you take home the total. That is the dollar you started with times the string of 1.1s and 0.9s. So how much should you pay to play this game? Well, on each flip, your payout can either grow or shrink, and each is equally likely each time you toss the coin. So the expected factor each turn is just 1.1 plus 0.9 divided by 2, which is 1. So if you start out with $1, then your expected payout is just $1. That means you should be willing to pay anything less than $1 to play this game, right? Well, if you look at the distribution of payouts, you can see that you could win big. If you tossed 100 heads, you'd win 1.1 to the power of 100. That's almost $14,000. Although the chance of that happening is around 1 in 10 to the power of 30. You'd be more likely to win the lottery 3 times in a row. On the other hand, the median payout is around 61 cents. So if you're only playing the game one time and you want even odds of turning a profit, well then you should pay less than 61 cents. Though either way, if you played the game hundreds of times, your payout would average out to $1. Now watch what happens if we switch the x-axis from a linear scale to a logarithmic scale. Well then, you see the curve transforms into a normal distribution. That's why this type of distribution is called a log normal distribution.
When random effects multiply, if I have a certain wealth, and then my wealth goes up by a certain percentage next year because of my investments, and then the year after that, it changes by another random factor. As opposed to adding, I'm multiplying year after year. If you have a big product of random numbers, when you take the log of a product, that's the sum of the logs. So what was a product of random numbers then gets translated into sums of logs of random numbers. And that's what leads to this so-called log normal distribution. And log normal distributions produce big inequalities. You don't just see a mean, you see a mean with a big long tail. It's much more likelihood of really big events, in this case, tremendous wealth being obtained, than you would expect from a normal distribution.
The reason this curve is so asymmetric is because the downside is capped at 0. So at most, you could lose $1. But the upside can keep growing, up to nearly $14,000. Now let's go on to table 3. Again, you'll be tossing a coin. But this time, you start out with $1 and the payout doubles each time you toss the coin. And you keep tossing until you get a heads. Then the game ends. So if you get heads on your first toss, you get $2. If you get a tails first and then hit a heads on your second toss, you get $4. If you flipped 2 tails and then a head on your third toss, you'd get $8, and so on. If it took you to the nth toss to get a heads, you would get 2 to the n dollars. So how much should you pay to play this game? Well, as in our previous example, we need to work out the expected value. So suppose you throw a head on your first try. The payout is $2, and the probability of that outcome is 1/2. So the expected value of that toss is $1. If it takes you 2 tosses to get a heads, then the payout is $4, and the probability of that happening is 1/4. So again, the expected value is $1. We also need to add in the chance that you flip heads on your third try. In that case, the payout is $8, and the probability of that happening is 1/8. So again, the expected value is $1. and we have to keep repeating this calculation over all possible outcomes. We have to keep adding $1 for each of the different options for flipping the coin, say 10 times until it lands on heads, or 100 times before you get heads. I know it's extremely unlikely, but the payout is so huge that the expected value of that outcome is still $1. So it still increases the expected value of the whole game. This means that theoretically, the total expected value of this game is infinite. This is known as the St. Petersburg paradox. If you look at the distribution of payouts, you can see it's uncapped. It spans across all orders of magnitude. You could get a payout of $1,000, $100,000, or even $1 million or more. And while $1 million payout is unlikely, it's not that unlikely, it's around 1 in a million. Now, if you transform both axes to a log scale, you see a straight line with a gradient of -1. The payout of the St. Petersburg paradox follows a power law. The specific power law in this case is that the probability of a payout x is equal to x to the power of -1, or 1 over x. In the previous games, when you have a normal distribution or even a log normal distribution, you can measure the width of that distribution, its standard deviation. And in a normal distribution, 95% of the data fall within 2 standard deviations from the mean. But with a power law, like in the St. Petersburg paradox, there is no measurable width. The standard deviation is infinite. This makes power laws a fundamentally different beast with some very weird properties.
Imagine you take a bunch of random samples and then average them, and then take more random samples and average them. You'll find that the average keeps going up. It doesn't converge. And the more you measure, the bigger the average is, which is really weird. It sounds impossible, but it's because it has such a heavy tail, meaning the probability of really whopping big events is so significant that if you keep measuring, occasionally you're going to measure one of those extreme outliers, and they will totally skew the average. It's sort of like saying, if you're standing in a room with Bill Gates or Elon Musk, the average wealth in that room, is going to be $100 billion or something, because the average is dominated by one outlier.
And that same idea, one outlier can dominate the average, shows up online too. A handful of companies, servers, and data centers hold the personal information of millions of people. So when one of them gets hacked, it can have ripple effects across the whole network. We've had scammers get a hold of email addresses and phone numbers of writers on our team and then send them messages pretending to be me. That is where today's sponsor, NordVPN, comes in. NordVPN encrypts your internet traffic so your personal data stays private, even when the wider system isn't. It protects you from hackers, trackers, and malware with threat protection, even when you're not connected to a VPN. Within just 15 minutes of registering a new email, we saw that 5 leaks had already been detected. NordVPN lets you browse securely from anywhere in the world by routing your connection through encrypted servers in over 60 countries. You can try it completely risk-free with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Just scan this QR code or go to nordvpn.com/Veritasium to get a huge discount on a 2-year plan plus 4 extra months free. That's nordvpn.com/Veritasium for a huge discount. I'll put the link down in the description. I'd like to thank NordVPN for sponsoring this video, and now back to power laws. So why do you get a power law from the simple St. Petersburg setup? If you look at the payout, x, you can see it grows exponentially with each toss of the coin, x equals 2 to the n. But if you look at the probability of tossing the coin that many times to get a heads, you can see that this probability shrinks exponentially. So the probability of flipping a coin n times is 1/2 to the power of n. But we're not really interested in the number of tosses, we're interested in the payout. Now we know that x equals 2 to the n, so instead of writing 2 to the n in our probability equation, we can just write x. So we end up with this. The probability of a payout of x dollars is equal to 1 over x, or in other words, x to the power of -1.
You put them together, the exponentials conspire to make a power law. And that's a very common thing in nature, that a lot of times when we see power laws, there are 2 underlying exponentials that are dancing together to make a power law.
One example of this is earthquakes. If you look at data on earthquakes, you find that small earthquakes are very common, but earthquakes of increasing magnitudes become exponentially rarer. But the destruction that earthquakes cause is not proportional to their magnitude. It's proportional to the energy they release. And as earthquakes grow in magnitude, that energy grows exponentially.
So there's this exponential decay in frequency of earthquakes of a given magnitude, and an exponential increase in the amount of energy released by earthquakes of a certain magnitude. So when you combine those two exponentials to eliminate the magnitude, what you find is a power law.
But power laws also reveal something deeper about the underlying structure of a system. To see this in action, let's go back to the third coin game and the St. Petersburg paradox. Now you can draw all the different outcomes as a tree diagram, where the length of each branch is equal to its probability. So starting with a single line of length 1, and then a half for the first 2 branches, a quarter for the next 4, and so on. Now, when you zoom in, you keep seeing the same structure repeating at smaller and smaller scales. It's self-similar, like a fractal. And that's no coincidence. We see the same fractal-like pattern in the veins on a leaf, river networks, the blood vessels in our lungs, even lightning. And in all of these cases, we can describe the pattern with a power law. Power laws and fractals are intrinsically linked. That's because power laws reveal something fundamental about a system's structure.
So I've got a magnet and I've got a screw. And you'll notice if I bring them close together, then the screw gets attracted to the magnet. And that's because there's a lot of iron in it, which is ferromagnetic. But watch what happens if I start heating this up. You see that? Ah, there it went. There it went. You see, you heat it up and suddenly it becomes non-magnetic. To find out what happened, let's zoom in on this magnet.
Inside a magnet, each atom has its own magnetic moment, which means you can think of it like its own little magnet or compass. If one atom's moment points up, its neighbors tend to point that way too, since this lowers the system's overall potential energy. Therefore, at low temperatures, you get large regions called domains where all the moments align. And when many of these domains also align, their individual magnetic fields reinforce to create an overall field around the magnet. But if you heat up the magnet, each atom starts vibrating vigorously. The moments flip up and down, and so the alignment can break down. And when all the moments cancel out, then there's no longer a net magnetic field. Now, if you have the right equipment, you can balance any magnetic material right on that transition point, right between magnetic and non-magnetic. This is called the critical point, and it occurs at a specific temperature called the Curie temperature. I asked Casper and the team to build a simulation to show what's going on inside the magnet at this critical point.
Each pixel represents the magnetic moment of an individual atom. Let's say red is up and blue is down. Now, when the temperature is low, we get these big domains where the magnetic moments are all aligned, and you get an overall magnetic field. But if we really crank up the temperature, then all of these moments start flipping up and down, and so they cancel out, and the magnet loses its magnetism. So that's exactly what happened in our demo. But if we tune the temperature just right to that Curie temperature, then the pattern becomes way more interesting.
This looks like a map.
Like a map?
Yeah, it almost looks like the Mediterranean or something. It's almost stable. Like, atoms that are pointing one way tend to point that way for a while, but there is clearly fluctuations as well, so domains are constantly coming and going. It's both got some elements of stability and some persistence over time, some features which are consistent, but it's also not locked in place,
Right.
because you notice changes over time.
If you zoom in, you find that the same kinds of patterns repeat at all scales. You've got domains of tens of atoms, hundreds, thousands, even millions. There's just no inherent skill to the system. That is, it's skill-free. It's just like a fractal. And if you plot the size distribution of the domains, you get a power law.
The underlying geometry suddenly shows a fractal character that it doesn't have on either side of the phase transition. Right at the phase transition, you get fractal behavior, and that pops out as a power law.
In fact, whenever you find a power law, that indicates you're dealing with a system that has no intrinsic scale. And that is a signature of a system in a critical state, which it turns out has huge consequences.
See, normally in a magnet, below the Curie temperature, each atom influences only its neighbors. If one atom's magnetic moment flips up, then that means that its neighbors are slightly more likely to point up too. But that influence is local. It dies out just a few atoms away. But as the magnet approaches its critical temperature, those local influences start to chain together. One spin nudges its neighbor, and that neighbor nudges the next, and so on, like a rumor spreading through a crowd. And the result is that the effective range of influence keeps expanding, and right at the critical point, it becomes effectively infinite. A flip on one side can cascade throughout the entire material.
So you get these small causes, just a single flip, to reverberate throughout the entire system.
And it gets right into that point where the system is maximally unstable. Anything can happen. It's also maximally interesting in a way. It means the system is most unpredictable, most uncertain. It's really hard to know what's going to happen next. And that seems to be a natural procedure that happens in many different systems in the world.
One such system is forest fires. In June 1988, a lightning strike started a small fire near Yellowstone National Park. This was nothing out of the ordinary. Each year, Yellowstone experiences thousands of lightning strikes. Most don't cause fires, and those that do tend to burn a few trees, maybe even a few acres, before they fizzle out. 3/4 of fires burn less than 1/4 of an acre. The largest fire in the park's recent history occurred in 1931. That burned through 18,000 acres, an area slightly larger than Manhattan. But the 1988 fire was different. That initial spark spread, slowly at first, covering several thousand acres. Then, over the next couple of months, it merged with other small fires to create an enormous complex of megafires that blazed across 1.4 million acres of land. That's around the size of the entire state of Delaware. That's 70 times bigger than the previous record, and 50 times the area of all the fires over the previous 15 years combined. So what was so special about the 1988 fires? Well, to find out, we made a forest fire simulator.
We've got a grid of squares, and on each square, either a tree could be there, it could grow, or it could not be there. There's going to be some probability for lightning strikes. So, the higher the probability, the more fires we're going to have. We can run this.
So trees are growing.
Trees are growing.
Forest is filling in. Nice. Getting pretty dense.
What do you expect is going to happen?
I expect to see some fires. Probably, now that... Oh, that was good. That was a good little fire. Whoa. Whoa. No way. Whoa, that's crazy. You haven't adjusted the parameters, right? It's just like...
Not yet.
This seems like a very critical situation just by itself. I say that because of how big that fire was.
This sort of system will tune itself to criticality, and you can see it start to happen. So right now, I think is a good moment where you have basically domains of a lot of different sizes. And then one way to think about it is if some of these domains become too big, then you get a single fire, like that one, perfectly timed.
Burns them all
It's just
out.
going to propagate throughout the whole thing and burn it back down a little. But then if it goes too hard, then now you've got all these domains where there are no trees. And so it's going to, grow again to bring it back to that critical state.
I can see how it's the feedback mechanism, right? That the fire gets rid of all the trees and there's nothing left to burn. And then that has to fill in again.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if there hasn't been a fire, then the forest gets too thick, and then it's ripe for this sort of massive fire.
For a magnet, you have to painstakingly tune it to the critical point, but the forest naturally drives itself there. This phenomenon is called self-organized criticality. Yeah, and if you let it run, what you get is, again, a power law distribution. So this is log. So it should be a straight line.
That kind of stuff seems so totally random and unpredictable, and it is in one way, and yet it follows a pattern. There's a consistent mathematical pattern to all these kind of disasters. It's shocking.
Is there something fractal about this?
Mostly in terms of the, domains of the trees when you're at that critical state. So you get very dense areas, you get non-dense areas.
What does this have to do with the game of life?
Strikes, you can get fires of
What
all sizes.
does
Most
any of
often,
this
you get
have to
small
do
fires
with
of 10 or
playing the
fewer
game
trees
of life
burning.
wrong?
A
Please.
little less frequently, you get fires of less than 100 trees.
Please
And then
tell me.
Every once in a while, you get these massive fires that reverberate throughout the entire system.
Now, you might expect that because the fire is so large, there has to be a significant event causing it. But that's not the case, because the cause for each fire is the exact same. It's a single lightning strike. The only difference is where it strikes and the exact makeup of the forest at that time. So, in some very real way, the large fires are nothing more than magnified versions of the small ones. And even worse, they're inevitable. So, what we've learned is that for systems in a critical state, there are no special events causing the massive fires. There was nothing special about the Yellowstone fire.
In 1935, the US Forest Service established the so-called 10 a.m. policy. The plan was to suppress every single fire by 10 a.m. on the day following its initial report. Now, naively, this strategy makes sense. I mean, if you keep all fires under strict control, then none can ever get out of hand. But it turns out this strategy is extremely risky.
So let's say we're going to bring down the lightning probability. So it's very small, only 1 in a million right now. And we're also going to crank up, the tree growth a little bit. Now, what do you think is going to happen?
We're gonna get some big fires, I would imagine. Like a lot of not fire and then some huge fires. Yeah.
Yep.
Oh boy.
So nowadays, the fire service has a very different approach. They acknowledge that some fires are essential to make the mega fires less likely. So they let most small fires burn and only intervene when necessary. In some cases, they even intentionally create small fires to burn through some of the buildup. Though it could take years to return the forest to its natural state after a century of fire suppression.
But it's more than just the Earth's forests that are balanced in this critical state.
Every
What does
day,
this have
the
to do
Earth's
with the
crust
game
is
of
moving
life?
and rearranging itself. Stresses build up slowly as tectonic plates rub against each other. Most of the time, you get a few rocks
What is the game
crumbling.
of
The
life?
ground might move just a fraction of a millimeter. But the stresses dissipate
is
in
dumb.
mini earthquakes that you wouldn't even feel.
There are really tiny earthquakes that are happening right now beneath your feet. You just can't feel them because they're very small. But they are earthquakes. They're driven by small slipping movements in the Earth's crust.
But sometimes, those random movements can trigger a powerful chain reaction.
In Kobe, Japan, the morning of January 17th, 1995 seemed just like any other. This was a peaceful city, and although Japan as a country is no stranger to earthquakes, Kobe hadn't suffered a major quake for centuries. Generations grew up believing the ground beneath them was stable. But that morning, deep underground, a stress released nearby the Nojima fault line. The stress propagated to the next section of the fault, and the next. Within seconds, the rupture cascaded along 40 kilometers of crust, shifting the ground by up to 2 meters and releasing the energy equivalent of numerous atomic bombs. The resulting quake destroyed thousands of homes, along with most major roads and railways leading into the city. It killed over 6,000 people and forced 300,000 from their homes.
How far it goes depends a lot on chance and the organization of all that stress field in the Earth's crust. And it just seems to be organized in such a way that it is possible oftentimes for the earthquake to trickle along an avalanche along a long way and produce a very large, unusual earthquake. But if you look at the process behind that earthquake, it is exactly the same physical process. It's just that the earthquake generating process naturally produces events that range over an enormous range of scale. And we're not really used to thinking about that.
We have this ingrained assumption that we can use the past to predict the future. But when it comes to earthquakes or any system that's in a critical state, that assumption can be catastrophic because they're famously unpredictable. So how can you even begin to model something like the behavior of earthquakes?
In 1987, Danish physicist Per Bak and his colleagues considered a simple thought experiment. Take a grain of sand and drop it on a grid. Then keep dropping grains on top, until at some point the sand pile gets so steep that the grains tumble down onto different squares.
What they looked at was the size of these, what they were calling avalanches, these reorganizations of numbers of grains of sand. They asked for, how often do you see avalanches of a certain size?
This is the most simple version of a sand pile simulator that you could almost imagine. We're gonna drop a little grain of sand, at first always in the center, and then it's just gonna keep going up. For 1 grain, it'll be fine. For 2 grains, it'll be fine. 3 grains, it'll be fine, but it's on the edge of toppling. And then when it reaches 4 or more, it's gonna basically go. Feels a bit like a, I don't know, pulsing thing, like something's trying to escape or something. very video game-like. That seemed pretty crazy. And it is symmetrical.
Yeah, nice geometric features.
So this might be interesting because right now we paused it at a point where this middle one is gonna go. And then you look around it and you see, essentially you can think of these brown or these 3 tall grain stacks as being maximally unstable. They're about to go. And so you could think of them as these fingers of instability. If anything touches them, the whole system, like they're just gonna go.
I see it propagating out.
It's cool seeing it slower. I feel like you can see several waves propagating at the same time.
Some people have reasoned that the Earth's crust becomes riddled with similar fingers of instability, where you get stresses building up. And then when one rock crumbles, it can propagate along these fingers, potentially triggering massive earthquakes. If you look at the data, there's some even more compelling evidence that links the sand pile simulation to earthquakes.
Let's say instead of dropping it at the center, pretty unrealistic to have it drop at the center, I'm gonna drop at random.
Yeah, that is crazy.
You can actually see it tune itself to the critical state. Like at the start, you only see these super tiny avalanches.
Yeah.
And then now it's everything.
It has to build up.
We can slow down a little. Oh, and that's a super clean power law.
There are events of all sizes. One grain of sand might knock over just a few others, or it could trigger an avalanche of millions of grains that cascade throughout the entire system. And if you look at the power law you get from the sand pile simulation, it closely resembles the power law of the energy released by real earthquakes. But if you look at the sand pile experiment more closely, it doesn't just resemble earthquakes.
What does it remind you of?
Forest fires.
Right? Feels like it's the exact same behavior.
That's the really surprising thing. And that's why this little paper with a sand pile was published in the world's top journal, because it did something that people just didn't really think was possible.
Now, what's ironic is if you look at real sand piles, they don't behave like this.
Okay, you said sand. I'm going to do an experiment on a real sand pile. And of course, it doesn't follow a power law distribution of avalanches at all. It's totally wrong. Per Bach naturally gets a chance to reply to the criticism. And he says, I'm pretty close to quoting, he says, self-organized criticality only applies to the systems it applies to. So he doesn't care. The fact that his theory is not relevant to real sand piles, so what? Get out of my face. He's interested in bigger fish to fry than sand piles. It's like you're taking me too literally. I'm talking about a universal mechanism for generating power laws, and the fact that it doesn't work in real sand is uninteresting to him. I thought that took some real nerve.
You could think about the Earth and the Earth going around the sun. That's a very complex system. You've got the molten core, everything sloshing around, then you've got oceans, and you've even got the moon going around the Earth, which in theory, all should affect the exact motion of the Earth around the sun. But Newton ignored all of that. All he looked at was just a single parameter, essentially, the mass of the Earth. And with that, he could correctly, for the most part, predict how the Earth was going to go around the sun. Similarly here, there are people that have looked at these phenomena that go to the critical state. In this case, it's self-organized criticality, because it brings itself there. And what they find is that there's this universal behavior where it doesn't even really matter what the subparts are. You just get the behavior that's the exact same.
At that critical point, when all the forces are poised and the system is right on that delicate balance between being organized, highly organized, or being totally disorganized, it turns out that almost none of the physical details about that system matter to how it behaves. There's just a universal behavior that is irrespective of what physical system you're talking about. The term that was used is called universality. And it's kind of a miracle. It means you can make extremely powerful theories without involving any technical details, any real details of the material.
What this means is that you could have these systems that on the surface seem totally different. But when you get to the critical point, they all behave in the exact same way.
The other thing you could do is instead of this being trees, you could imagine it being people. And the thing that's spreading
Is disease.
is disease. Yeah.
You almost get something for nothing at these critical points.
See, many of these systems fall into what's known as universality classes. Some of them you need to tune to get there, like magnets at their Curie temperature, or fluids like water or carbon dioxide at their critical point. But some other systems seem to organize themselves to criticality, like the forest fires, or sand piles, or earthquakes. But what's crazy is that if you succeed in understanding just one system from a class, then you know how all the systems in that class behave. And that includes even the crudest, simplest toy models, like the simulations we've looked at. So you can model incredibly complex systems with the most basic of models. And some people think this critical thinking applies even further.
When we look around the world, there are lots of systems that show the same power law behavior that we see in these critical systems. It's in everything from DNA sequencing to the distribution of species in an ecosystem to the size of mass extinctions throughout history. We even see the same behavior in human systems, like the populations of cities, fluctuations in stock prices, citations of scientific papers, and even the number of deaths in wars.
So some people argue that these systems, and perhaps many parts of our world, also organize themselves to this critical point.
So the fact that all these natural hazards, as they call them, floods, wildfires, and earthquakes, they all follow power law distributions, means that these extreme events are much more common than you would think based on normal distribution thinking.
If you find yourself in a situation or an environment that is sort of governed by a power law, how should you change your behavior?
If you have events with one of these parallel distributions, what you're seeing most of the time is small events. And this can lull you into a false sense of security. You think you understand how things are going. Floods, for example, there are a lot of small floods, and then every once in a while, there's a huge one. One response to this is insurance. That insurance is designed precisely to protect you against the large, rare events that would otherwise be very bad. But then there's the other side of that picture, which is you're the insurance company that needs to insure people. And they have a particularly difficult job because they have to be able to say how much to charge so that they have enough money to pay out when the big bad thing comes along.
In 2018, a forest fire tore through Paradise, California. It became the deadliest and most destructive fire in the state's history. But the insurance company, Merced Property and Casualty, hadn't planned for something that huge. And when the claims came in, they just didn't have the reserves to pay out. So just like that, the company went bust.
But while extreme events can cripple some companies, there are entire industries that are built on power law distributions. Between 1985 and 2014, private equity firm Horsley Bridge invested in 7,000 different startups. And over half of their investments actually lost money. But the top 6% more than 10x'd in value and generated 60% of the firm's overall profit. In fact, the best venture capital firms often have more investments that lose money. They just have a few crazy outliers that show extraordinary growth, a few outliers that carry the entire performance. In 2012, Y Combinator calculated that 75% of their returns came from just 2 out of the 280 startups they invested in. So venture capital is a world that depends on taking risks, in the hope that you'll get a few of these extreme outliers which outperform all of the rest of the investments combined.
Book publishers operate in a similar fashion. Most titles flop, but in 1997, a small independent UK publisher called Bloomsbury took a chance on a story about a boy wizard. The boy's name, of course, was Harry Potter, and now Bloomsbury is a globally recognized brand. We see a similar pattern play out on streaming platforms. On Netflix, the top 6% of shows account for over half of all viewing hours on the platform. On YouTube, less than 4% of videos ever reach 10,000 views, but those videos account for over 93% of all views.
All these domains follow the same principle that Pareto identified over 100 years ago, where the majority of the wealth goes to the richest few. The entire game is defined by the rare runaway hits.
But not every industry can play this game. Like if you're running a restaurant, you need to fill tables night after night. You can't have one particularly busy summer evening that brings in millions of customers to make up for a bunch of quiet nights. Over a year, the busy nights and quiet ones balance out, and you're left with the average. Airlines are similar. An airline needs to fill seats on each flight. You can't squeeze 1 million passengers onto one plane, so it's the average number of passengers over the year that defines an airline's success.
We're used to living in this world of normal distributions and you act a certain way.
Yeah.
But as soon as you switch to this realm that is governed by a power law, you need to start acting vastly different. It really pays to know what kind of world or what kind of game you're playing.
That is good. That's good, yes. You should come on camera and just say that, just like that. You were on camera, you just did do it.
If you're in a world where random additive variations cancel out over time, then you get a normal distribution. And in this case, it's the average performance, so consistency, which is important. But if you're in a world that's governed by a power law, where your returns can multiply and they can grow over many orders of magnitude, then it might make sense to take some riskier bets in the hope that one of them pays off huge. In other words, it becomes more important to be persistent than consistent.
Though, as we saw in the second coin game, totally random multiplicative returns give you a log normal distribution, not a power law. To get a power law, there must be some other mechanism at play. In the early 2000s, Albert Laszlo Barabási was studying the internet, and to his surprise, he found that there was no normal web page with some average number of links. Instead, the distribution followed a power law. A few sites like Yahoo had thousands of times more connections than most of the others. Barabási wondered what could be causing this power law of the internet, so he made a simple prediction. As new sites were added to the internet, they were more likely to link to well-known pages. To test this prediction, he and his colleague Reka Albert ran a simulation. They started with a network of just a few nodes, and gradually they added new nodes to the network, with each new node more likely to connect to those with the most links. As the network grew, a power law emerged. The power was around -2, which almost exactly matched the real data of the internet.
Look at that.
That's fun.
It's still so satisfying. This will basically also distribute a power law. One of the ideas here is that, this could be individuals or even companies. And so if you're more likely to become more successful or more well-known, the more known or successful you already are, you're going to get this sort of runaway effect where you get a few that sort of dominate, the distributions. I wonder if part of the takeaway is if you're playing some sort of game that is dominated by a power law, then you better do the work, as much of it as early as possible, so you get to benefit from the snowball effect, essentially.
Yeah, I guess that's a good idea. I'm not sure whether you can control it. Human beings like to think of ourselves as being a bit special, and that maybe somehow, because we're intelligent and have free will, we will escape the provenance of the laws of physics and order and organization. But I think that's probably not the case. So if you look at the number of world wars, and if you make a crude measure of how big is a world war by how many people it kills, which is a bit macabre, but still, you find that, again, it follows a power law, virtually identical to the power law you find in stock market crashes.
So if the world is shaped by power laws, then it feels like we're poised in this kind of critical state, where two identical grains of sand, two identical actions can have wildly different effects. Most things barely move the needle, but a few rare events totally dwarf the rest. And that, I think, is the most important lesson. If you choose to pursue areas governed by the normal distribution, you can pretty much guarantee average results. But if you select pursuits ruled by power laws, the goal isn't to avoid risk, it's to make repeated intelligent bets. Most of them will fail, but you only need one wild success to pay for all the rest.
And the thing is that beforehand, you cannot know which bet it's going to be because the system is maximally unpredictable. It could be that your next bet does nothing, it could do a little bit, or it could change your entire life. In fact, around 3 years ago, I was reading this little book.
And in the book, there was this little line saying something like, one idea could transform your entire life. So right underneath that, I wrote, send an email to Veritasium.
A couple days later, I wrote an email to Derek saying, hey, Derek, I'm Casper, I study physics and I can help you research videos. I didn't hear back for 4 weeks, so I was getting pretty sad and just wanted to forget about it and move on. But then a couple days later, I got an email back saying, hey Casper, we can't do an internship right now, but how would you like to research, write, and produce a video as a freelancer? So I did, and that's how I got started at Veritasium. Hey, just a few quick final things. All the simulations that we used in this video will make available for free for you to use in the link in the description. And the other thing is that we just launched the official Veritasium game. It's called Elements of Truth, and it's a tabletop game with over 800 questions. It's the perfect way to challenge your friends and see who comes out on top. Now, at Veritasium, we're all quite competitive. So every time we play, things get a little bit heated, but that's honestly a big part of the fun. Now, when we launched on Kickstarter, we got a lot of questions asking if we could ship to specific countries. And originally, we didn't enable this, and this is our mistake, this is on us, and we totally hear you. But I'm glad to say that right now we have enabled worldwide shipping. So no matter where you are in the world, you can get your very own copy. To reserve your copy and get involved, scan this QR code or click the link in the description. I want to thank you for all your support, and most of all, thank you for watching.
This is so profound. So now, take a breath. Recognize what's happening. Stop labeling your trials as punishments. See them for what they are. A sacred refinement. A process of becoming. You asked for success. Life responded with a mirror, showing you every weakness, every flaw, every excuse that must be burned away before you can rise. Let it burn. Let the fear surface. Let the doubt speak. And then overrule it. Because that is your power. That is your right. That is your responsibility. You are not a victim of your tests. You are the student. And if you learn well, you will become the master. Not because you escaped the fire, but because you walked through it and came out gold. To reveal the real you, not the one dressed in comfort and fantasy, but the one forged in fire and conviction. Life will not hand you power without knowing first that you are strong enough to wield it with purpose. Understand this clearly. You are being tested not to fail, but to rise. You must come to realize the secret most never understands. Success never arrives without resistance. Because resistance is what builds the capacity to hold success. You cannot become more without opposition. You cannot step into your future while still attached to your past. So the tests begin. And these tests are not random, they are tailored. They are designed for the exact areas where your character must grow. If your confidence is weak, life will present rejection to strengthen it. If your patience is thin, delays will train your endurance. If your discipline is lacking, distractions will multiply until you learn to focus. You are not being punished for being prepared. And that preparation is sacred. Because it is the furnace in which your destiny is being molded. Now I ask you, how will you respond? The average man complains. He asks why it's hard. He wishes for ease. He resents the process. But the man who is destined for greatness responds differently. He doesn't curse the challenge, he uses it. He sees in every setback the seed of strength. In every trial, the opportunity to rise. And in every delay, the deepening of its roots. Do not mistake delay for denial. Just because your dream has not arrived does not mean it is not coming. This is...
Kelihatannya cuma jalan-jalan, tapi bisa dibayar jutaan per hari.
I don't know how to play piano. What is this?
In 1935, Einstein came up with a thought experiment that showed quantum mechanics breaks one of the most sacred principles in physics, that nothing can go faster than the speed of light. Physicists assumed he was wrong. They thought that at 56, Einstein was an old man past his prime, and just unable to accept the new theory of physics because it was too radical. But 30 years later, one man stumbled across Einstein's forgotten paper when he realized something. The prediction could actually be tested. When scientists ran the experiment, they were shocked. Quantum physics really does break the universal speed limit.
We're obliged to invoke something like actions going faster than light from one place to another.
This is a video about one of the spookiest and most misunderstood experiments in all of physics. And it might even be the strongest evidence we have that we live in many worlds. If the sun were to disappear all of a sudden, how long would it take until we noticed and were released out into space? Newton's theory says that gravity acts instantly across any distance. So if there's a change in gravity, we should feel it immediately. But Newton himself was disturbed by this. That one body may act upon another at a distance is to me so great an absurdity that I believe no man who has a competent faculty of thinking can ever fall into it. But in 1905, Einstein realized action at a distance isn't just absurd, it leads to outright paradoxes. Einstein had discovered that observers moving at different speeds can disagree about when events happened. Let's say you see two things happen at the same time. An observer speeding past would see it differently. To them, one of these happened first, and both points of view are equally valid. But in the case of gravity, this leads to disaster. Say you see the sun disappearing and Earth flying off at the same time, as Newton predicted. Then, the other observer sees something impossible. They see the Earth flying off first, even while the sun is still there, and it should, of course, be pulling the Earth in. So to them, it looks like cause and effect are reversed. The only way out of this paradox is to reject the assumption we started with, so gravity can't be instant. It took Einstein 10 years to fix this issue, and in the process, he completely overhauled our understanding of gravity. Gravity is caused by the bending of space-time. When there's a change in gravity, that only affects the local space-time, and then that ripple spreads out to nearby regions, which spread farther out until eventually they reach us. This theory of gravity is local because effects spread from place to place at the speed of light instead of being instant. From our frame of reference, if the sun disappeared, that ripple would take about 8 minutes to reach us. Another observer might disagree about the length of the delay, but now we all agree that the sun disappeared first.
This is why nothing can go faster than light. The delay between cause and effect ensures all observers agree on the order.
After Einstein fixed gravity, all of classical physics obeyed this important rule. But then, Einstein studied the new theory of quantum mechanics and made a terrible discovery. This is one of the most famous photographs in physics. It was taken at the 1927 Solvay conference, where the architects of the brand new quantum theory gathered to discuss it. Around 60% of the attendees would win Nobel Prizes, but Einstein thought they'd gotten something fundamentally wrong, and this was his chance to prove it. So he took to the stage with a thought experiment. Imagine you fire a single electron through a narrow slit toward a circular detection screen. Well, quantum mechanics says that this electron has some sort of wave associated with it, called a wave function, which spreads out through space as it travels. When the electron hits the screen, you detect it at a single point. Where it turns up depends on the amplitude of the wave. If the wave is very big in a particular area, the electron is more likely to turn up there. Let's say it appears here. So far, everyone was following. This is what quantum mechanics predicts. But Einstein's next question surprised them. Why doesn't the electron turn up at this other spot a moment later? There's only one electron, so we can't detect it twice. But the way quantum mechanics ensures this is that when the electron was detected at the first spot, its wave function collapsed to zero everywhere else instantly. That's why the probability of finding it at the second spot is now 0. There's no longer any wave there. But Einstein asked the audience to think about what this means. The measurement here must instantly affect the wave function over here, no matter how far apart these locations are. In other words, quantum mechanics requires instant influences across distance. It violates locality. Einstein concluded his talk by saying this is an entirely peculiar mechanism of action at a distance, and that this implies to my mind a contradiction with the postulate of relativity. Einstein's argument was so simple and his talk so short that people didn't know what to make of it. One audience member said, "I feel myself in a very difficult position because I don't understand what precisely is the point which Einstein wants to make. No doubt it is my fault." That man was Niels Bohr, the most influential figure in quantum physics at the time. Bohr's institute in Copenhagen had become the hub for the new field. Dozens of young scientists like Werner Heisenberg came to learn from him. As one of his disciples remembers, Bohr had invited a number of us to his home where we sat close to him, some literally at his feet, on the floor, so as not to miss a word. Bohr wasn't the one who wrote the mathematical rules of quantum mechanics. Instead, he told everyone what they meant. While others were confused by the theory, Bohr offered answers. His philosophy became known as the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics.
My general understanding of the Copenhagen interpretation is you have the wave function, it describes everything that you can know about a particle or a system, and it evolves according to the Schrödinger equation, and at some point you're going to make a measurement, and at that point the wave function collapses.
And I think that one bit of that you said was like, the wave function is all you can know about the particle. And I think that was like a pretty important point to Bohr.
As Bohr would put it, it's wrong to think that the task of physics is to find out how nature is.
The job of physics is just to predict measurements in the lab, which quantum mechanics does incredibly well. As for what the electron is doing when you're not looking, well, to Bohr, that question didn't even make sense to ask. The wave function tells you everything physics can or should tell you.
Einstein couldn't stand the Copenhagen interpretation. In a letter to his ally Schrödinger, he called it a tranquilizing philosophy, or religion. Einstein felt his thought experiment exposed a critical weakness in the Copenhagen interpretation. He'd shown that the way the wave function collapses is non-local. and so he reasoned maybe the wave function is the problem. Maybe it's not the best way to describe the electron after all. He may not have convinced Bohr of this during his talk, but he was determined to do it during the rest of the conference.
Physicists tell a version of this story, that you will find in physics textbooks and in pop science books, and that, physicists tell amongst ourselves that what happened was Einstein and Bohr had a great debate, and Einstein was unhappy with quantum mechanics because it was fundamentally probabilistic. He tried to show that there were conceivable experiments that you could use to get around those uncertainty relations. And Bohr showed over and over and over again that you couldn't do that. And eventually, everybody agreed with Bohr.
That's Adam Becker, author of What is Real, a great book about the history of quantum mechanics. As he explained to us, Bohr may have just misunderstood the purpose of Einstein's thought experiments. We have documented evidence of this in at least one case. Einstein described a thought experiment that involved a box of photons and a mirror. Its purpose was to show the non-locality of the Copenhagen interpretation in action.
Bohr just misunderstood it. And when he recounted it to others later on, he drew a little diagram of what Einstein's thought experiment setup was, and it just didn't have the mirror in it at all. And yet this is taken as like the great victory for Bohr over Einstein, which is crazy. But history is written by the victors, right?
To understand what Einstein was arguing for, think of the relationship between Newton's gravity and general relativity. Newton's theory works well in most situations, but in that theory, gravity is a non-local force, leading to paradoxes. This was the motivation for coming up with Einstein's general relativity, which is local. Einstein believed the same logic applied to quantum mechanics. His thought experiment revealed that quantum theory is non-local, so just like with Newton's gravity, quantum mechanics must not be the final theory. There must be a local one that will replace it. And as a bonus, he thought this new theory might even unify gravity with the quantum world.
It would be hard to imagine coming to the final theory right away, and the fact that you can see paradoxes like this would make you think there's got to be more to it that we just don't have yet.
Absolutely.
But Einstein hadn't even persuaded Bohr that quantum mechanics really is non-local. So in 1935, he made one last attempt to convince the community that there was a contradiction between quantum mechanics and relativity. With the help of two younger colleagues, Boris Podolsky and Nathan Rosen, he formulated another, even more striking thought experiment that shows the non-locality of quantum mechanics. This paper is now known as the EPR paper, after its authors. Here is a simplified version of their thought experiment. Imagine a single high-energy photon suddenly becomes two particles. One of them is an electron, and to conserve total charge, the other is a positron. Since one is negative and the other is positive, they cancel out. But both electrons and positrons have a property called spin, and like electric charge, this also needs to be conserved. If the light started out with zero spin, well then the two particles together must have zero total spin as well. For example, if the direction of the electron spin is this, the positron has to have spin in the opposite direction, so that they perfectly cancel out. But the electron spin could have been this instead, or this. All of these possibilities are valid, so the rules of quantum mechanics say that the electron does all of these possible things at once until it's measured. It's not just that we don't know what the spin is, the electron really is doing everything. The only restriction is whatever the electron is doing, the positron must do the exact opposite. This also means that when the electron is measured and its state is determined, so is the positrons. This is what we mean by entanglement. The two particles' states depend on each other. But how do we measure the particles and force them to do one thing? Well, for that, we use the Stern-Gerlach machine. It's essentially a strangely shaped magnet, and it's how we measure spin. The orientation of the magnets determines what axis you're measuring the spin in. For example, if the machine is like this, and we shoot in a particle with spin in the positive z direction, it will certainly go to this spot we'll call plus. If instead a particle has negative z spin, it will certainly go down to minus. So this Stern-Gerlach machine measures spin in the z-axis. So what happens when we put in one of our entangled particles? When the electron goes into this machine, it either goes to plus or to minus, with 50-50 probability. Let's say our electron goes to plus. Well, this means it went from being in an indeterminate state to positive z spin. But what about the positron? Well, the only way to conserve spin is if it's now in the negative z spin state. When it's measured, there is a 100% chance it's minus. It has to be that way to conserve spin. But the authors of the paper realized there's something very odd about this result.
To see what's wrong with this, let's imagine that the electron and the positron carry these envelopes with them. These envelopes represent the state of the two particles. Until they're measured, both of the particles are in a superposition of being plus and minus at the same time. So both options are in the envelope. But now let's move the positron to someone who's far, far away. In this analogy, opening the envelope is like measuring the spin of the electron, but that causes the wave function of the electron to collapse to just one possibility. In this case, it's plus. But what happens to the other envelope far away? Well, it needs to instantly collapse to minus, because otherwise, when the experimenter opens their envelope, they have a chance of seeing plus, which would violate the conservation of spin. But if it needs to collapse instantly when the electron is measured, then how does it know what to collapse to? It must receive intel from the faraway electron, but that message has to travel much faster than the speed of light to get to the positron in time. And so with this argument, Einstein, Podolsky, and Rosen had shown that the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics really is non-local. Einstein had already shown this in his conference talk, but this argument was even more decisive.
It does seem like it's the same thing, but now it's ramped up and you've got these two separate particles to do those two separate measurements, and one measurement influencing the other measurement definitely feels wrong.
Yeah, exactly. I think he really realized that it's measurements that are the problem in quantum mechanics.
The wave function of a single particle, or of this pair of particles, can end up spread over vast distances. That isn't itself an issue. But when the wave function collapses, the information about that collapse needs to spread everywhere the wave function is. That's what makes quantum mechanics non-local.
The EPR paper didn't just point out this non-locality issue. They proved that there is only one local alternative theory for explaining this experiment. In this local story, instead of the electron choosing whether to be plus or minus when it's measured, it actually makes that choice when it's still in contact with the positron. There's some random way that this plus and minus gets put into these two envelopes. Which is why the plus and minus are called hidden variables. And because this alternative theory assigns these hidden variables in a local way while they're still in contact with each other, rather than over a big distance, we call this a local hidden variable theory. Now, this local hidden variable theory is going to be able to explain this experiment really simply. Let's pass away the positron. And now, when the electron is measured as a plus, it doesn't have to rush to tell the positron. The positron already knows. There is no action at a distance. This local hidden variable story is so much more sensible than the quantum one.
So we're forced to accept one of two explanations for this experiment. Either non-locality, like the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics, or a local hidden variable theory. Given that non-local action at a distance contradicts relativity, Einstein thought this was definitive proof that the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics is wrong, and therefore there must be some local hidden variable theory that will replace it. Einstein showed us that quantum mechanics allows influences that seem to travel faster than light. But with today's video sponsor, you can have your own spooky action at a distance. With one click, NordVPN can teleport your digital presence anywhere in the world. It's not actually faster than light, but it might feel like it. NordVPN has thousands of servers in over 120 countries, which means you can access content that would otherwise be region locked. This way, you can access all your favorite content from wherever you are with virtually no lag. But it's not just about access. Every time you connect to public Wi-Fi at a coffee shop, at an airport, or a hotel, you're potentially exposing your data to anyone on that network. Now, NordVPN encrypts your connection, so even if someone intercepts your traffic, all they see is gibberish. And with their strict no-logs policy, your browsing stays private. One account covers up to 10 devices, so you can protect your phone, laptop, tablet, even your router. When you use my link, you'll get a huge discount on a 2-year plan plus 4 additional bonus months. Get it at nordvpn.com/Veritasium. It's risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. So go check it out at nordvpn.com/Veritasium. You can scan this QR code or click that link down in the description. I want to thank NordVPN for sponsoring this part of the video, and now back to Bell's theorem.
The EPR paper certainly got a lot of attention. Without asking Einstein, Podolsky leaked the paper to the press, and the story ended up in the New York Times.
Prodigious harvest of the day's intelligence is reached.
Einstein was the most famous scientist in the world, and he was going after the strange but successful theory of quantum mechanics. So, of course, the press loved it. But what did scientists think of the argument itself?
So the reaction of the physics community was at first mixed. There were some people, sort of old allies of Einstein's, who were very happy with it. Schrödinger being sort of at the top of that list. And in fact, in an attempt to clear up some of the misunderstandings that people were having about the EPR paper, Schrödinger publishes the thought experiment known as Schrödinger's cat, sort of back up Einstein and show the kind of problem that he and Einstein had with quantum physics. Bohr, meanwhile, is like, oh my God, what the hell is this? He must be wrong. How do we show that he's wrong? Then Bohr ultimately, in his sort of painful and complicated style, ends up coming up with a response to the EPR paper. This response is sort of famously obscure and difficult to understand, and I've read it in detail, and I will tell you, Bohr's reply is either nonsensical or makes some actual mistakes.
There's a very well-turned sentence which I believe Bohr took a great deal of trouble in formulating, and whose meaning is just absolutely obscure to me.
Bohr said in his reply to EPR, in his multiple replies to EPR, that there is no question of anything non-local going on. So the ultimate reaction of the physics community, at least in the immediate years and decades following the publication of EPR and Bohr's reply in 1935, was to think that Bohr had settled it with his reply, even though people didn't really understand what Bohr had said.
2 decades later, Einstein died, still questioning quantum mechanics. But the majority of the physics community had moved on without him. Bohr, however, never forgot about the EPR paper. In 1962, 7 years after Einstein's death, Bohr gave an interview about Einstein. And he lamented that Einstein wasted decades on fruitless thought experiments because he simply could not accept quantum mechanics. It was terrible that Einstein fell in that trap to work with Podolsky, Bohr said. Rosen is worse from my point of view. Rosen even today believes the EPR thought experiment. Podolsky has given it up, as far as I know. The whole idea is absolutely nothing when one really gets into it. You may think that I say it too strongly, but it is true. There's absolutely no problem in it. The next day, Bohr took a nap after lunch and never woke up. And so, after many decades, the Einstein-Bohr debate was over.
Bohr's authority was part of the reason the EPR paper didn't get the attention it deserved.
But there was another reason physicists ignored it. In the EPR experiment, both theories, Copenhagen quantum mechanics and Einstein's local hidden variable alternative, make exactly the same prediction. You get the same results either way. Debating two different interpretations of the same experimental result seemed like armchair philosophy, not real physics. The Copenhagen interpretation makes good predictions, so why not just teach that and move on?
It just seems like, shut up and calculate, I think is the message that kind of gets pushed.
The general attitude was, this is done. Who cares? None of this matters. It's all settled. Einstein and Bohr had a big debate about it, and Bohr won. Do you think you're smarter than Niels Bohr? Do you think you're smarter than Albert Einstein?
It seemed like it would be impossible to resolve this debate until another physicist turned his attention to it.
John Bell was an undergraduate student shortly after World War II in this new era of physics, and so, of course, he was taught the Copenhagen interpretation.
John Bell's doubts about quantum mechanics, by his own recollection, showed up basically the minute he learned it. In his first quantum mechanics class, he was, getting pretty upset with the instructors and saying, you're being too vague. What the heck do you mean about measurement?
Bell was never fully satisfied by the answers he got about the foundations of quantum mechanics. But when he was doing his PhD, he was encouraged to study something a little bit more respectable. And so he studied nuclear physics and went on to have a very accomplished career at CERN. But after 8 years of working in particle physics, in 1963 he took an academic sabbatical. And finally, he had time to focus on his doubts about quantum mechanics. He said, "I always knew it was waiting for me." He began by re-examining the old debates and the papers that most physicists had long since dismissed as philosophical distractions, including the EPR paper. After this research, he said, "I felt that Einstein's intellectual superiority over Bohr, in this instance, was enormous, a vast gulf between the man who saw clearly what was needed and the obscurantist." He realized Einstein's logic was sound. One of the two conclusions is true.
The question was, could you prove which one using an experiment?
An experiment of this sort seemed much more feasible by Bell's time. The EPR paper was the first to consider the idea of entanglement. These days, entanglement is a core feature of quantum mechanics, but Einstein had been first to even point out entanglement existed. This is why the EPR paper was set up as a thought experiment, because no one had made such...
If you want to know if someone really understands evolution, just ask them this one weird question.
Why does poop smell bad?
Whoa. Oh gosh.
Because there's bacteria in it, I guess.
Microbiome, probably. Trash?
Yeah, trash
of the body. The food we eat because of the chemicals.
Farts don't always smell bad. So.
Yeah, well, that's a different question entirely. Do you think it objectively smells bad?
Yes, I think so. Yes.
How do you think it smells to flies?
Like
they like it. Yeah, they like it. Yeah. Animals love stinky things.
Yeah.
They're attracted to it.
Poop smells good to flies because poop is full of nutrients. They use it as food. But it's also full of bacteria that can be life-threatening to humans. So the real reason poop smelled bad to us is because if anyone ever thought it smelled good, they would probably get really sick, die, and not pass on their genes. After all, it's about survival of the fittest. But survival of the fittest what?
I mean, most people think of natural selection as being about the survival of the fittest individual animal.
Individual.
Animal.
Animal. Okay, so it's like an individual.
Yeah.
Which makes sense. I mean, individuals best adapted to their environment have increased odds of survival and therefore a higher likelihood of passing on their genes. So it follows that each individual should do everything it can to survive and reproduce. That is, it should be selfish.
But if that's true, then how do you explain this?
I mean, worker bees will sting predators to protect the hive, even though it might kill them in the process. Female worker ants are sterile, so they can't reproduce. But regardless, they work for the colony for their entire lives until they die. Monkeys adopt orphans, wolves bring meat to non-hunting members of the pack, and squirrels can let out alarm calls to warn others about nearby predators.
So if natural selection is all about selfish individuals, why do we observe so much altruism in nature?
The survival is of the species that can adapt.
I think generally the species.
For the survival of the species.
So it's the survival of the species.
Okay. Yeah, right.
But survival of the fittest species or the fittest group also doesn't work. I mean, think about what you need for natural selection to occur.
You need something that replicates itself many times over, creating copies, and then you need a pruning process whereby some of those copies get eliminated and some thrive to go on and create more copies. The problem with groups, or species as a whole, is that they don't typically make copies of themselves. So you almost never get copies of groups fighting other copies of groups to see which groups win out.
So if it's not survival of the fittest individual and it's not survival of the fittest group, then what is it? Well, to explain that, I want to take you on a little journey, all the way back to the beginnings of the Earth.
Where we are now, there is nothing. Well, not really nothing, but nothing interesting. There are only simple things like these blobs. This one might be a carbon dioxide molecule, or it might be cyanide. We don't know for sure what they are, but we do know that these compounds are very simple. So for now, they'll just be blobs floating around our void. In fact, much of what we'll encounter along our journey here are just hypotheses. A lot of Earth's early history is still a mystery, so keep that in mind. Now, every so often, our blobs get a surplus of energy, maybe from a ray of UV light or a nearby hot source,
This is the first major upgrade to our void, excess energy, as it allows our blobs to interact with each other. Most of the time, this interaction leads to nothing, but sometimes these blobs can combine into more complicated compounds. Here's a simple simulated example where we only have 4 red blobs. Right now, they are all individual particles, but each time step we move forward, let's say there's a 10% chance that all 4 combine into one red megablob. Now imagine this megablob isn't very stable. For every time step it's alive, it has a 95% chance of falling apart back into the 4 smaller blobs. If we add more of these red blobs into the mix, you'll notice that they rarely ever come together. On average, a megablob only exists around 10% of the time. But if we were to reduce the chances of the megablobs dissolving to only 1%, the void would suddenly be filled with them. This fact hints at an important law that governs our void, the law of stability. Unstable blobs fall apart and vanish, stable ones endure. Now watch what happens if we speed this up dramatically, maybe a couple of years per second, maybe even a couple million. You can see our blobs keep getting random jolts of energy, so they combine with others to form more complex compounds. Most attempts fail and fall apart, but every so often, by pure chance, you get a compound that is more stable than the blobs it's made of. This doesn't happen because the blobs want to build more complex structures, it's just because these new configurations happen to be more favorable in the environment. And now, when these complicated compounds become abundant enough, they too get a chance to combine, making our void increasingly complex. And one day, by accident, this causes an extremely unique shape to form, one with a special property. See, the blobs it's made of just happen to attract similar blobs from the surrounding environment. This red blob always attracts green blobs, and this purple blob always attracts yellow ones. And piece by piece, all these blobs attract their opposites until their counterparts suddenly snap into position next to the original shape. Now, this shape goes on to do the same thing. Its green blobs attract red ones, and yellow ones attract the purple, until another shape yet again snaps into position. This new shape looks exactly like the original. What just happened, fully spontaneously, is replication. One shape became 2. This marks the birth of the first replicator. We don't know exactly what this replicator looked like. It might have been a single standalone molecule, or a group of molecules that worked together to replicate. There's a lot of debate on this today, so instead, let's represent the replicator as a character. How about this one here? Perfect. Keep in mind, it's still just a lifeless molecule, one without any intent or purpose. Now, you might think that the chances for the replicator to form were extremely unlikely. But in our void, where we have hundreds of millions of years to play with, what might seem impossible to us becomes virtually inevitable. And the thing is, the replicator only has to arise once. Once it's here, it can take the simpler compounds available in the environment to copy itself at a much faster pace. And so it does that until it entirely fills our void. At least that's what you'd expect. But there is a flaw in the process. See, during the replicator's conquest of the void, one of its copies makes a mistake. Perhaps a stray ray of UV light hits it during the replication process, or the replicator uses a building block it wasn't supposed to.